Welcome! Today we are diving deep into a truly fundamental clinical skill, understanding the jugular venous pulse, or JVP. We're going to tackle this in two big parts. First, we'll lay down the solid foundation you need for the clinical exam itself, and then we'll get into the really advanced stuff, waveform analysis, and show you how to turn this simple observation into an incredibly powerful tool for differential diagnosis. So here's our game plan. We're starting with why the JVP even matters, its clinical significance. Then we'll get practical and cover the anatomy you need to know to find it. From there, it's all about technique, how to measure it properly and use special maneuvers. After that, we'll decode the waveform itself, and finally, we'll put it all together to diagnose some serious pathological conditions. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the clinical significance of the JVP. So what exactly is the JVP, and why is it such a big deal in a cardiovascular exam? Well, at its very core, the jugular venous pressure is a direct window into the pressure inside the right atrium. And that's absolutely crucial, because the right atrial pressure gives us a real-time, dynamic look at the hemodynamics of the entire right side of the heart. This is probably the best way to think about it. The JVP is essentially a natural, non-invasive right heart catheter. It lets us figure out pressures that would normally require a pretty invasive procedure, giving us this incredible window into how the right heart is functioning, right there at the bedside. Okay, so that's the theory. Now let's translate that into what you actually do with a patient. The absolute, non-negotiable first step is correctly and confidently finding the right blood vessel. The vessel we're after is the right internal jugular vein, the IJV. And the anatomy really tells the story of why. The right IJV runs in a nice, straight, direct line right down through the superior vena cava and into the right atrium. The left IJV, on the other hand, takes this more winding, roundabout path, which can totally distort the pressure wave, making it way less reliable. Now, a question I get a lot is, why can't we just use the external jugular vein? It's so much easier to see. And look, it's a fair question, but there are three critical reasons we don't. First, it has valves, and those valves can totally block the true pressure wave coming from the heart. Second, it has to cross through a bunch of layers of fascia, which can muffle or hide the pulse. And finally, if a patient is hypotensive, it can vasoconstrict and basically disappear on you. Making sure you're looking at the venous pulse and not the big booming carotid artery right next to it is absolutely paramount. And there are two dead giveaways here that you need to know. First, the JVP isn't something you can really feel, and you can make it disappear with just light pressure from your finger. You can't do that with the carotid. Second, and this is key, the height of the JVP column will normally drop when the patient breathes in. The arterial pulse doesn't change with respiration. These two tricks are your most reliable ways to know you're looking at the right thing. All right, so you found the pulse. Awesome. The next step is to actually put a number on it, and to do that, we use a standardized procedure right at the bedside. The process has four very specific steps. First, you've got to get the patient positioned correctly, with their trunk at a 45-degree angle. Second, find the sternal angle, that little bump where the manubrium meets the sternum, also called the angle of Louis. Third, you want to carefully watch the IJV and find the very highest point where it's pulsing. And finally, you measure the vertical distance, in centimeters, from the sternal angle straight up to that highest point. And here's a vital tip. While you can see the waveforms best when the patient is lying flat, you have to do the actual measurement at 45 degrees. Okay, so here's the magic number you're looking for. A vertical height greater than 3 centimeters above the sternal angle is officially an elevated JVP. And if you want to estimate the actual right atrial pressure, it's easy. Just add 5 centimeters to whatever you measured. Why 5? Because the sternal angle is a fixed landmark that's pretty consistently about 5 centimeters above the center of the right atrium. Now, what if the JVP is tough to see? Well, we can use a provocative maneuver called the abdominojugular reflex, or AJR. You might have heard the older term hepatojugular reflex, but AJR is what we use now. Basically, you apply firm, steady pressure right around the belly button for a good 10 seconds. What this does is squeeze blood from the abdominal circulation back towards the chest, giving the right side of the heart a sudden extra load of blood to handle. How the heart responds to this little stress test tells us a ton about the right ventricle's health. A normal, healthy right ventricle just takes that extra blood in stride, so you'll only see a small, temporary rise in the JVP. But if you see a sustained rise of more than 3 centimeters that lasts for over 10 seconds, that's a positive test. It's a huge red flag that the right ventricle is struggling and can't handle that increased preload, a key sign of impending right heart failure. So we've covered how to find it and how to measure it. Now we get to the really fascinating part of our analysis, learning to read the language of the heart as it's written in the JVP waveform. You see, the normal JVP isn't just one pulse. It's this beautiful, complex dance of waves and descents, and each little movement corresponds to a very specific event in the cardiac cycle. Let's walk through it. First step is the A wave. That's the little push from the right atrium contracting just before systole. Then you get the C wave, which can be hard to see, and it's caused by the tricuspid valve bulging back into the atrium as the ventricle starts to squeeze. After that, the X descent shows the atrium relaxing. The V wave follows as the atrium passively fills up with blood while the tricuspid valve is closed. And finally, the Y descent is that drop in pressure when the tricuspid valve swings open and the atrium empties into the ventricle. Okay, now that we have a solid grasp of what's normal, we can start playing detective. We can look for weird things in this waveform and connect them directly to specific diseases. Let's start with that first wave, the A wave. If you see a large A wave, it means the atrium is having to squeeze extra hard against some kind of resistance, like a stiff tricuspid valve and stenosis or a beefed up right ventricle. Now that's different from a cannon A wave. That's a giant, sometimes random wave that happens when the atrium contracts at the exact same time as the ventricle, smack into a closed tricuspid valve. You see that in conditions where the atria and ventricles are out of sync, like VTAC or complete heart block. And of course, if you have atrial fibrillation, there's no coordinated atrial squeeze at all, so the A wave just disappears. The dips, or descents, are just as telling. A really deep, prominent X descent is a classic sign you see in both cardiac tamponade and constrictive pericarditis. On the flip side, if the X descent is just gone, it suggests that the normal atrial relaxation is being wiped out by something, most often a big jet of blood flowing backward in severe tricuspid regurgitation. Then there's the Y descent. A super fast, deep Y descent, also known as Friedreich sign, is a hallmark of constrictive pericarditis. But a slow, lazy Y descent tells you the atrium is having trouble emptying, the classic sign of tricuspid stenosis. When you see weird things happening with the V wave, you should be thinking about volume. A prominent V wave happens when there's way too much blood filling the atrium during systole, like what you'd see with an atrial septal defect or, again, severe tricuspid regurgitation. In the absolute worst cases of tricuspid regurgitation, that X descent valley gets completely filled in and the C and V waves merge into one single massive wave. We call that a giant V wave or a CV wave, also known as Lancisi's sign. And this is where it all comes together. Look at how these individual clues create these unique diagnostic signatures. For tricuspid regurgitation, you're looking for that absent X descent and a giant CV wave. For tricuspid stenosis, it's the large A wave and the slow Y descent. For constrictive pericarditis, you get those prominent X and Y descents, making this classic W shape. And what separates cardiac tamponade is that you get the prominent X descent, but the Y descent is blunted or even gone entirely. Finally, there are two other really important signs you have to know. The first is Kussmaul's sign. This is totally paradoxical. It's when the JVP actually rises when a person breathes in instead of falling. It tells you the right ventricle is so sick it can't handle the normal increase in blood flow that comes with inspiration. You see it in things like constrictive pericarditis or severe RV failure. Second is a pulseless JVP. If you see a high venous column that isn't pulsing at all, it's basically pathognomonic for an obstruction of the superior vena cava. The connection to the pulsing heart has been cut off. You know, the level of detail we've gone into here is completely intentional. It's based on a core philosophy. You don't achieve true mastery or diagnostic confidence by just memorizing facts for a test. It comes from understanding the pathophysiology so deeply that applying it in a clinical setting just becomes second nature. And this really leads us to a final, pretty provocative question. In our modern world of echocardiograms and all sorts of advanced cardiac imaging, is mastering a classic physical sign like this still essential? Is this kind of deep bedside analysis an old-fashioned skill? Or is it a timeless, indispensable part of being a truly astute clinician? It's definitely something worth thinking about. Thank you for joining me for this explainer.